The Battle of Bud Dajo, 1906, the mountain that became a graveyard. They climbed the mountain believing it would protect them. When the smoke cleared, the mountain had become a cemetery. High above the island of Jolo stood an ancient volcanic crater known as Bud Dajo. For generations, it had been a place of refuge for the Tausug people. In March 1906, it became the site of one of the deadliest and most controversial battles in Philippine history, nearly forgotten in many classrooms, rarely discussed outside academic circles. Yet its photographs shocked the world. Even Americans questioned what had happened. This is the story of Bud Dajo, a story of fear, resistance, misunderstanding, and a tragedy whose echoes are still felt more than a century later. The year was 1898. Spain's centuries-long rule over the Philippines had come to an end after the Spanish-American War, but independence did not immediately follow. Instead, Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States through the Treaty of Paris. Across much of Luzon and the Visayas, Filipino revolutionaries now found themselves fighting a new colonial power. Far to the south, however, another reality existed. The Muslim sultanates of Mindanao and Sulu had never been fully conquered by Spain. For centuries, the Tausug, Maguindanao, Maranao, Sama, and other Moro peoples had defended their autonomy against repeated foreign expeditions. To many Moros, the arrival of American troops did not represent liberation. It represented another outside power claiming authority over lands that had long governed themselves. American officials hoped to establish order through diplomacy, treaties, and military outposts. Some local leaders cooperated. Others remained deeply suspicious. The peace that followed was uneasy and increasingly fragile. On the island of Jolo rose Bud Dajo. It was an extinct volcanic cone covered with dense forest and steep trails. Its summit contained a broad crater that could shelter hundreds of people. For generations, families had retreated there during times of conflict. By early 1906, several hundred Moro residents had gathered on the mountain. Historical accounts differ on why. Some American reports describe the group as armed resistors who had ignored colonial authority, refused disarmament, and resisted taxation. Many historians, however, note that the community also included women, children, and elderly people who sought safety in the crater. The exact composition of those gathered remains debated. What is not disputed is that Bud Dajo had become both a refuge and a symbol of resistance. American commanders increasingly viewed the encampment as a challenge to their authority. Negotiations were attempted, messages were exchanged, but distrust reigned deep. Neither side believed the other would keep its promises. As tensions mounted, military action drew closer. In early March 1906, American forces began surrounding the mountain. Soldiers from the U.S. Army, supported by constabulary units and artillery, prepared to ascend Bud Dajo. The terrain favored the defenders. The slopes were steep, the jungle was thick. Narrow trails forced attackers into exposed positions. Those inside the crater understood the mountain. Many possessed traditional weapons, such as kriss swords, spears, and shields. Some also had firearms. The Americans, however, brought modern rifles, machine guns, and artillery. The balance and firepower would prove devastating. At dawn, the assault began. Columns of soldiers climbed different sides of the mountain. Gunfire echoed through the forest. Smoke drifted among towering trees. The battle had begun. The fighting was intense. American troops encountered determined resistance along the narrow trails. Defenders launched attacks from concealed positions. Every advance came at a cost. But as the Americans gained higher ground, their superior firepower began to dominate the battlefield. Artillery shells exploded among defensive positions. Machine guns swept exposed areas. Rifle volleys echoed across the crater walls. Eventually, American forces reached the summit. What follows remains one of the most controversial episodes in American colonial history. Many of those inside the crater fought until they could no longer resist. Others attempted to flee. Families became trapped amid the chaos. Historical records agree that the casualties among those on the mountain were extraordinarily high. The overwhelming majority of those in the crater were killed. American losses were comparatively small. The battle ended in only a few days, but its legacy had only begun. When the fighting ended, photographs emerged. American soldiers stood among the dead. The images spread through newspapers. Readers across the United States stared in disbelief. Questions quickly followed. Had this truly been a military victory? Or had it become something else? Journalists, politicians, missionaries, military officers, each offered different interpretations. Some defended the assault as a necessary campaign against armed resistance. Others condemned it as excessive and deeply troubling. Reports emphasized that many women and children had died during the operation. The exact numbers remain disputed. Modern historians continue to debate casualty estimates, with many placing the total deaths between several hundred and over 1,000 people. The photographs transformed Bud Dajo into an international controversy. It became impossible to ignore. One of the strongest critics was American writer Mark Twain. Twain had become a vocal opponent of American imperial expansion. The photographs from Bud Dajo reinforced his concerns. He questioned whether such violence could be justified in the name of civilization. His writings challenged readers to confront uncomfortable questions about war, empire, and morality. Not everyone agreed. Military leaders argued that the operation had been unavoidable. They maintained that heavily armed resistance threatened regional stability. Supporters insisted soldiers had acted under dangerous combat conditions. The debate exposed a growing divide within American society itself. Bud Dajo was no longer merely a battle fought on a distant island. It had become a symbol of a larger argument of colonial rule. Among the Tausug people, Bud Dajo entered collective memory not simply as a battle, but as a profound tragedy. Stories were passed from one generation to the next. Families remembered relatives who never returned. The mountain became sacred ground, not because victory had been won, but because lives had been lost. Memory survived through oral tradition long before historians revisited the event in greater detail. For many in Sulu, Bud Dajo represented sacrifice, resilience, and the painful consequences of mistrust between cultures. Even today, elders recount the story with solemnity. The crater is more than a geographic landmark. It is a place of remembrance. History rarely divides neatly into heroes and villains. Bud Dajo unfolded within a larger struggle shaped by colonial ambition, cultural misunderstanding, political resistance, and fear. American commanders believed they were restoring order. Many Moros believed they were defending their homes, traditions, and independence. Those perspectives collided on the slopes of one mountain. The result was catastrophic. Understanding Bud Dajo requires acknowledging both the realities of armed conflict and the immense human cost borne by civilians caught within it. The event remains the subject of continuing historical research, with scholars examining military records, survivor accounts, and contemporary reporting to better understand what happened. Unlike many battles celebrated in textbooks, Bud Dajo offers no simple narrative of triumph. Its legacy raises difficult questions. How should societies remember colonial wars? How do we reconcile military objectives with humanitarian consequences? Whose voices deserve to be heard? For decades, the event received relatively little attention in national education, yet historians increasingly recognize Bud Dajo as a pivotal episode in the history of American colonial rule and in the long story of Moro resistance. Remembering it does not diminish other chapters of Philippine history. Instead, it broadens our understanding of the country's many experiences under foreign powers. Today, Bud Dajo stands quiet. Trees cover the slopes once scarred by gunfire. Birdsong has replaced the thunder of artillery. Visitors climbing the mountain may see only a peaceful landscape. But beneath that silence lies a history written in courage, fear, grief, and resilience. The Battle of Bud Dajo reminds us that history is not only found in the stories repeated most often. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the chapters left in the shadows. For the people of Sulu, the mountain is more than a landmark. It is a memorial, a reminder of lives forever changed, and a call to remember that every conflict carries a human cost that echoes long after the last shot is fired. Perhaps the greatest purpose of history is not simply to recount victories or defeats. It is to remember people, to understand their choices, to learn from their suffering, and to ensure that places like Bud Dajo are never forgotten. Not because they offer easy answers, but because they challenge us to confront the complexities of the past with honesty, empathy, and humility. The mountain still stands, silent, watching over Jolo, keeping the memories of 1906 alive for those willing to listen.
This is Aline of Exploring Mindanao. Thank you for watching.